I don't know if you ever watched it.
Oh, they say you have to do that.
I mean, I like one there. I don't really necessarily want to drive through downtown and put on my phone. In front of me, like I have the Bears game on, they're not here.
Obviously, homecoming week had a nice start yesterday. Obviously, some traditions I've never been a part of, from coloring of the fountain to a little bit of a beginning. I know tonight all of our players will be represented at a student organization run event that I know our guys are excited about. I actually had guys emailing me or texting me to try to be a part of it. So spirit is high. I think the guys felt good to get a W. A lot of positive things, but a lot of things that we needed to correct coming into this week. So, from a health standpoint, really kind of just where we were last week. At this point last week on Monday, I didn't know if Jake and Spoon would be with us, but I think they're a lot closer this week than they were last week. The intent is to have those guys with us to get a couple guys back. That was really the first game plan that Coach Peterson has had, the ability to have both Josh McCray and Chase Brown in the kind of the game plan the whole week, the way they practiced and everything else. So that was, I think the results you saw on Saturday were a direct reflection on that. Also last week to have Keith Randolph back in the starting lineup, just, obviously a very talented player, but when you have personality like his, a demeanor, to have the tip ball from Isaiah to go to him and to, get that turnover situation was really big. I think our defensive guys have continued to kind of thrive into that personality the last couple of games, especially. You can see their practice habits become game day reality, which is something we talk about all the time. So I was really, really excited to see that and go forward. As far as Wisconsin, obviously a team that has them and Northwestern have shared the Big Ten West title of the last 5 years. Either one of those two programs has represented the Big Ten West. So had this game, on the forefront of our guys' mind, just because of the way who it is, not necessarily because of my past, but because of the way that it's represented in the Big Ten West title and the way it's kind of been carried out. Got a lot of respect for everything that Paul's done. Obviously, he and I have known each other for a long time. Several players in that program. I know I'm going to get the question right, but this game is about the University of Illinois football versus the University of Wisconsin football, and that's what it's about. That's what it's been driven. My preparation for any game is the exact same. Like I get the question, I get understanding, but really the attitude that I carried into the Nebraska preparation to the next week against UTSA, and then to Virginia, to Maryland, to Purdue, and then last week against Charlotte, and this week against Wisconsin has been the exact same. I'm not going to do anything more or less. I'm just not wired that way, and that's the way I teach our players and our coaches to go about it. So a very exciting opportunity for it to be a homecoming game, but to have the Big Ten race to come back into the Memorial Stadium and have the opportunity to play Wisconsin is very exciting for our players, and I think they'll reflect that in their preparation this week. So with that, open up for questions.
You're at the halfway point here of the season. What are some things that you've learned about this team at that point? And from a big picture standpoint, what have you learned about the job and the program?
Yeah, so we are at the halfway point in definition of behind us, right? You get 12 guaranteed opportunities, but really we've been kind of looking at this season into a 7-week season, bye week, 3-week season, bye week, 2-week season. I think before the year starts, just like next year to have an opener against Wyoming, we've kind of laid out the schedule the exact same. I think to play in those week 0 games and have 2 bye weeks gives you a chance to naturally assess. Through 6 games, just like after the 5th game, after the 4th game, 3rd game, we take a constant inventory of our roster. We take a constant inventory of our strengths, our weaknesses, offense, defense, and special teams. We have meetings on Sunday and Monday that are really kind of about what's behind us. But you transition Sunday night and into Monday into your preparation of your next opponent. So really self-reflection will come a little bit more next week during the bye week, but we have constant, self-scouts, offense, defense, special teams. The thing I've learned about our team probably more than anything is they care. They're very coachable. They're never satisfied with their performance, whether it's a win or a loss. They've been able to keep moving forward, and hopefully they probably understand the bigger picture more than anybody else because they've been through the bad parts of the past, and they want to definitely gravitate to the good parts. Even the guys that will be leaving us at the end of this year I would say over the last 2 weeks have made me appreciate that they want this place to have sustained success even beyond when they're here.
Update on Seth and Isaiah again.
Yeah, Seth, I would say that, he's a probable for Saturday. I do think there's a chance of him getting there. A lot of it depends on how his body, how it heals, and goes forward. And who was the other one? Oh, IG. IG was actually cleared to come back in the game, but because our offense took a 6-minute, 30-second drive, we didn't have to get him back out there, but IG was cleared to go back in the game as it stood Saturday.
Coach, you mentioned on Saturday the communication that your defensive staff has during the game through the headsets. Is that unique, or have you ever been around it like that, where it's just so fluid?
It's not unique, but it is. Maybe a little bit depends on the personality of the coordinator, right? I think one of the things that Ryan displayed to me when I first met with him and to where we are today, like, he loves information. He's not a guy that stands up in front of the room and claims to have all the answers, or is a guy that isn't willing to listen to every detail. And not just our 5 full-time assistants, right? Ryan and the other 4 guys. I would say that anybody in that room as a graduate assistant, as a player, as a head coach, offensive coaches, Ryan is a sponge of information, and that's the part that's probably a little bit different.
On Saturday, you also kind of continue to say that the other guys help, and Ryan said today that the speed at which they get things fixed in between series is really fast.
Yep.
Can you comment on that at all as well?
As my first year as a play caller, right? I came in the room and I was the youngest guy in the room. I was the only guy that was new to the room. I went into a staff situation and had been there, but we changed the entire defensive package. And then, I distinctly remember when that transition happened, right, that it was a little bit different than when I was at Kansas State, where Kansas State, we were the #1 defense country, but there was 2 new guys that came in and then a transition as well. So it was kind of the dynamic of that room. Every year it's a little bit different. Next year, even if I keep these same 5 guys, if all of them are here next year and are with us, the dynamic will be a little bit different because there's growth, right? The part that I think has been impressive to me is the speed of the information is definitely something that Ryan has made reference to, but again, the ability to process it. Sometimes all the information is there and you can't communicate it. I think the #1 downfall a lot of times in society, whether we're talking about football or business or personal lives or relationships, a lot of times it's a lack of good communication, and football is no different. And I think that's the part our guys do a really, really good job of.
Brett, as you watch Wisconsin on tape, are there similarities to things you ran when you were there, and what's that system that they run that makes them so successful?
Yeah, I get the question. I think Paul and I were together for 6 of my 7 years, right? So definitely had a lot of common thoughts and ideas. Joe Rudolph, the offensive coordinator, was my tight ends coach. Mickey Turner, the tight ends coach, was the first kid that I ever recruited out of Missouri. A lot of great memories are tied to him, and he played a tight end in our system. There's some easy comparisons, but they are different. I think there's just in their schemes and their mechanics up front, there's definitely some things that are a little bit different, but the basic core value of run, play, action, they're very explosive. They got some dynamic players on the outside. They're very, very well coached up front. Obviously, their quarterback has done some very good things, but I would say that they're very similar to where we've been, but there's also a lot of very unique things that definitely pop out once you study the film closely.
Coach, you talked about this being a Big Ten football game. This is what you came here to play. Forgetting about the storyline that you coached there, is this a defining game for the culture you're trying to build here because it's such a big-time Big Ten football game?
I get if you want to turn it into it's a Big Ten game. We've won 1 game in the Big Ten. They've won none, right? So, I don't know if anybody's quantifying it as that, but I would guess it's every game is a big game when you're in the infancy of a program, when we're trying to build a foundation of how we're going to play. I'm excited because it's a Big Ten game, a Big Ten West opponent. There's a really good football team that's been able to sustain success for a long time, and for us to get to where we want to be, I've defined this program and several others in the Big Ten West as models of what we're trying to get to, and not necessarily schematically or personality-wise. Everybody's uniquely different. Every fan base is completely different. But I would say the respect for the success they've had in the past and the ability and the desire to want that here is what makes it big.
You talked after the game about earlier in the week, maybe trying to define some targets for wide receivers to run.
Last week.
Yeah, is that something you've done in the past? Like, you like to have your hand involved, or what prompted that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's usually out of necessity, right? Like at a previous institution I was at, we had a first, second, third, fourth string running back that all, eventually became NFL players, and they're really good. And to facilitate trying to keep them all in a capacity to help us with, winning games, we wanted to kind of have a formula. We didn't want to get in there at halftime and realize we'd only, maybe handed the ball off 6 times to guys that we wanted to target 18 times in the first half, right? I distinctly remember having a setback, I believe it was against Michigan, where, we looked at the game on Sunday and on at halftime we hadn't done the things that we thought were going to help us win. And in the end, we ended up losing that game. And I distinctly remember having that moment, kind of moving forward. And then also at a point when I was at Arkansas, we had Hunter Henry, who's a really good, very, very talented tight end. And we'd come out of a game or two where he had only been targeted 2 or 3 times. And I just said to myself, we can't have this. This is one of our position of strengths. Now, I can't hand the ball to him. As a receiver, it's a little bit different because it become targets. When you talk about a running back or someone that you're handing the ball to, you can kind of define that. But that's really when the evolution came, when I believe that was the year that we went my best record in the SEC West, and it was really, I think, a lot driven by offensively. We kind of had the formula for what we wanted to do, and we kind of stuck to that in our play calling.
When you're facing the number 1 rush defense in the country, how important is it to kind of stay committed to that run game, even if the results early on aren't what you want, because of what you want to do later on in the game?
Statistics are great. They're great things to reference. But a lot of times there's a lot of outside factors that roll into it. They're very, very stout. They're very good against the run. Obviously, we've been able to have some success running the football with a couple different ball carriers, but the key ingredient is what works Saturday, right? On Saturday, there's only going to be 2 opponents in that stadium. None of their opponents from this past and none of our opponents from the past are going to be out there. So what we do on Saturday is going to be greatly dedicated to, what our offense does against their defense and vice versa, and then what our special teams do against one another. So we don't ever reference a team like that. We just talk about the matchup and what we have.
There's been a tradition of wearing gray ghost uniforms on homecoming. Will that continue?
No. We won't be in. It's not necessarily the gray ghost. Obviously, a tremendous amount of respect for who he is and what he stood for and what he represents. But I would say that, one thing that I've carried forward in every game this year is the orange helmet. I think in today's world, the ability to identify an identity with a football team is very important, and so that's why our orange helmets have been a constant and will be a constant for us moving forward. I think we have a little photo shoot with one of our guys either tonight or tomorrow night, and we'll do a uniform reveal later in the week, which pains me to say, but it is very, 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 very popular. The model will not be me, so you got that to look forward to. But I do think that there's a certain value to that with our kids as well as with our fan base and also in recruiting, because I give Pat Pearson a tremendous amount of credit every week. I say this and dropped him a note last week, like literally every day in our office, there's something that he comes up with that I've never thought of or seen before in college football. And some of the things he's done this year to help us in a program that really maybe hasn't got the wins where we want it to be, but we need that excitement and that buzz with recruits as well as with the media as well as with our fan base. He's helped us tenfold in that. That's another great example.
When someone talks about
Darren Lowe elected to come back for next year. Turns out that it was a pretty good decision for him. But can you comment on his play and his backstory a little bit too?
Yeah, Vidarian has been a guy that's been very impressive to me since the day I walked in. Obviously heard his story and then began to know him and understand him. And he did play his most complete game. So obviously Chase Brown was given the Big Ten Player of the Week, but we gave the Offensive Big Ten Player of the Week to both him and Vidarian. V played extremely well, played physical, played with a purpose, and I think when the game needed to be taken over, he did that. I'd say Palso did the same. Kramer did, his standard, normal, usual. So the guys that we're asking to kind of take over in those big moments did that. I would say that, there's a lot of times when I walk in that building or Smith Center before 5 a.m., and a lot of times Velo will be in there already. Like, he is a professional before it becomes the question, right? Like when guys make the transition for the college to the NFL game, they ask the question a lot of times to me or the coaches and be like, can this guy be a professional? And he's a professional already. He's married with 2 beautiful children to a beautiful wife that he loves endlessly. And then, to take the whole guardianship of his older brother with the mother's passing, like just, if the world was full of a lot of Adarian Lowe, it'd probably be a better place for everybody.
But when someone talks about Madison, and when you think back, what do you remember about your time there and what you were able to do, both personally and professionally?
Well, personally, I better say I got married, right? Met a lot of great, I said this one time jokingly, this is when I was back there. I said there's two important people I met in Vegas, so one being my wife, and the other was I actually met Paul Christ in Vegas on a recruiting trip. He was actually working at Oregon State. And Coach Alvarez introduced us and crossed our paths because he knew what was going to happen in the future. I didn't. Met a lot of great relationships. I could go on and on about just, you guys know me well enough. I'm a very sentimental guy, right? Like stories mean things to me. So, Mickey Turner, who I mentioned, to recruit him the way we did and have him play for me as a tight end, a guy that I'm close with to this day. Bob Bostad as a linebacker coach was my first hire as a tight ends coach. He was from Wisconsin. His dad was a All-State Hall of Fame coach. And I remember when I brought Bo in on his interview, I asked about, how his dad's doing, and he's like, he's actually, he had some bad health conditions. And I said, have you told him about the interview? Because I don't want to tell him about that unless I get the job. So when I called him a couple days later and told him he had the job, he was ecstatic. And then his father passed shortly thereafter. And I remember his mom grabbing me at the funeral and saying, thanks for bringing my boy home. Just a million different, Kyle Costigan is an assistant coach who's probably one of the greatest recruiting stories that I had there. He was a really good player, but just how that whole thing unfolded, there's just Ross Kalaji, the defensive line coach, worked for me. There's just so many different things. I can't put a price tag on them, but I told our guys unequivocally on Sunday, even Saturday after the game, just as much as I talk to them all the time about their past is important to me because it defines who you are, right, and who you are at that moment. All of that is behind me. None of that applies to any moment in any preparation mode this week whatsoever. And it's easy for me to say that because I live it and I know it and I do it. I think it's hard for the outside world to understand that, but it really has zero impact on the impact of this game this week with our preparation or our performance.
You kind of mentioned the identity, how they built that thing up, and you continued and took it to another level. What did you learn there that might shape how you approach this?
100%, a great question. So, one thing that was brought to my attention when I was talking with Josh about this job was everywhere I'd been, right? At Iowa, at Kansas State, and at Wisconsin. All three had been places that really had not been very successful. And then when there was a coaching transition, the sustained success model that has replicated in all three of those programs, especially the two, right? Wisconsin and Iowa in the Big Ten West. I really had witnessed the Wisconsin transition, being an assistant at Iowa, knowing Coach a little bit, but really didn't know Coach Alvarez. But when I got to the University of Iowa as a player, he had already left. And then when he called me about becoming the defense coordinator there, we had really not really known each other. We had just had a couple common interest friends, Bobby Stoops, some people that we commonly knew each other. And once I was there and I began to hear the things that he talked about, like a simple thing like he talked about recruiting what you see in the grocery store, right? When you go in the grocery store, you see these people that look a certain way. Big people are stocking groceries. If there's big people in the grocery store, there's usually big people in the community, right? So just a little simple thing like that makes a lot of sense. I would say that, a huge part that I've obviously emphasized since I've come here is the walk-on thing. I walked on the University of Iowa because of the opportunities that were given to walk-ons. Both at Iowa and Wisconsin, I really saw the value in that, and we're already seeing that now here today in our program with the value that a lot of our walk-ons since I've been here have been added to scholarship and what that's brought to our program. So there's many things that are going to shape what we do here based on what I've done in the past, but this is Illinois, and because we have a state that's a little bit more probably recruiting ready, all right? There's in Wisconsin and in Iowa, there's a very small number of probably maybe even as a quarter a number of Division I players that are available every year compared to what Illinois has. So that has to be a tremendous advantage for us if that's the core of our DNA. So there's definitely some things that are similar, but they're also very uniquely different.
probably gonna hate this question, but you've got 99 wins. What would it mean to beat Wisconsin for your 100?
Well, to get a win on Saturday, I appreciate the question, is going to be something that we strive to do every week. The timing of it, I think that's just pure, the way the fate is laid out. I personally wish that I had tried to reach it, 12 games ago before I even came to Illinois. But I do understand the significance of it. But I really don't put 1 ounce of it. Was quickly brought to my attention by several people, right? The way it laid out. So I get it. Again, it's an outside source, but when Coach Bielema gets his 100th win is when we deserve to win, and when we play enough to execute to have a win, and that's probably the more fulfilling moment for me than anything.
Coach, you mentioned the emotional ties that you have to experience with other people. How much do you think you've grown since your time there individually?
Have I grown?
Yeah, as a
Unfortunately, I've grown
person,
physically and emotionally. I think that the part that's really fun to be a 51-year-old head coach now, even just to kind of go back and forth today and yesterday with some people that I've been around in my past, both in college and in the NFL, and realize now the things that I know that I thought I knew back then, but I really didn't. I just I was doing the best with what I knew and how I had to do it, but I definitely know now at 51 I'm a much better position, just football IQ-wise, and also connection with your players, connection with your staff, listening to people that are around you, that is very, very valuable. It's fun for me now to kind of sit back and take those little moments where I'm like, I probably wouldn't have done that 10 years ago, right? Or I wouldn't have known that 6 years ago. Those are the kind of moments that are a lot of fun for me. 4 hours ago, I was sitting there having a meeting with Josh McCray, because it was the first time really he's had adversity, right? Like I knew it was going to come. I didn't know when it was going to come. I didn't know how it was going to come about. But I knew I've had a lot of meetings since he's arrived on campus and before he got here. But that meeting to me 4 hours ago, I put a lot of prep into what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. And I don't think I would have done that probably 10 to 15 years ago. On the flip side of it too, just, I after watching Chase Brown from last spring to where we are, I knew that Saturday was going to happen. Like it had been delayed a little bit because he's been really banged up and injured, but he is an extremely gifted football player with an incredibly talented mind. And you just can't keep those things quiet very, very long. Now, the challenge is, which I grabbed him last night after practice, was, what can we do to move forward, right? Like now the awareness bell has been rung. Now everybody's going to kind of expect it out of you. Now, how do you set a precedence, right? And to have those two guys, as well as Jakari and some other guys, it's just really fun to be in that Smith Center working every day.
You mentioned that Brandon is close on, especially on some of those deep balls. What gives you guys the confidence that flip a switch?
Well, great question, and to your point, I think I constantly make it's a lot more enjoyable on Sundays after a win and a loss, but I love to sit back on Sunday and evaluate Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday practices and see how it reflects or what came out of the game. And there's a couple things in the deep ball shot play categories that jumped out to me right away watching those plays during practice as opposed to what happened during the course of the game. So there's a modification that we've done already that I believe will help us even further. But I also think the part that making that step forward for BP and whatever receiver ends up being on the back end of that is the confidence to do it, and then it's kind of like their game speed and go, right? Some of those shots we connected earlier were obviously with Art, and right on the cusp. There was one that was underthrown, there was one that was overthrown. Now we did have several different guys in the same thing, which actually from a defensive point of view, when you see so many guys taking those shots down the field, even though they're not completed, they do have an effect on the way they call a game, because one of those plays can literally take that game that ended up being a 10-point win into like a 17, 24-point win, but it wasn't because we didn't connect on those, so we have to do that. Thank you. Appreciate it.